Hello, friends. My name is Dr. Ashish Goyal, and I am a professor of medicine at the University College of Medical Sciences at the University of Delhi. In today's session, we are going to carry forward our discussion on how to make do files in Stata. And if you have watched my first video on the introduction to do files, this will take us a step forward from there and will help us make better do files. And also, so let me share my screen with you. And today we are going to talk about the basic contents of a do file. We will talk about how to make annotations in do files. We will talk about saving do files. So sometimes you might find that you don't remember a particular command. And how do you find it to put it in your do file? We will also talk about making scatter diagrams and labeling variables. So let's start and go into a Stata program. So here we are in a Stata file, and this is how it would look like if you remember from my previous discussion. And this is a do file that I have written to analyze a particular data set which we were dealing with. So if I am aware, or if I can have the foresight on how I am going to handle my variables once the data is collected, I can write a do file even before I have populated my data set, even before I have collected the data. And once I collect the data and I have the final Excel sheet with me, so I could just run this do file, I could execute this do file. And if you see, this is practically in a few seconds, I will have the entire data analyzed to my requirements, even without having to run all the commands again, and even without having to look at the data set. So here in the background, just by running or executing the do file, I have the entire data set, which now has been analyzed. So how to write better do files and how to save them. Saving is easy. How do you open a data file? So here there is the do file editor. If I click on the do file editor, it will open the do file. Once I open a do file, it will be blank and then I start writing. So here at the top are a few commands which should be a part of each good data file. So clear all, this command will clear everything that is in the data set, in the memory of Stata, in the working memory of Stata. It will clear the memory and allow for a new data to enter. The command capture log close will close any log file which is open previously in Stata. Version 16 is a good way to tell Stata that this do file has been written in which version of Stata. So as we advance and more better versions or more advanced versions of Stata come in, then Stata would recognize that this do file was written in the version 16. It's good to write the next command, macro drop all. We are not going to go into what are macros, but suffice here for today's argument that this is a good command to put in all the data files. Then there are two sets of commands. One is set more off and set line size 80. Now these were more relevant to previous editions or previous versions of Stata and may not be very relevant for the particular version of Stata 16 that we are using now. But these used to be good commands because to have in the Stata do file to set more off, which was a parameter which was quite problematic. You see here there is a more button. So this would stop at the time when the visible limit of Stata was exceeded, and then you would have to press more again and again to see all the analysis at one go. And set line size 80 was another command which was used for previous versions, but although it's not a basic requirement now in version 16. So next command here is log using, then there is an address of the log file in red, followed by replace and text. So replace is basically to replace any previous log file which is there. It will just replace it each time you run this particular do file and create a log file which will record everything that was done as a part of this log file. The next command is an import command, which will import the data from the Excel sheet into your working memory of the Stata, which we talked about in a previous discussion. Following this, we have this line in green. So this green line is basically something which Stata will recognize is an annotation or is a note that I have written for myself and is not a command that is to be run on the software. So for if I need to annotate something or if I want to write that this is a file, let's say I want to keep in my memory or to remind me that this is a do file that I have written to analyze the data of the class in 2021. So then Stata will, if I start any line with these three slashes, forward slashes, and end it with three forward slashes, Stata will recognize that this is a line which I have written for myself, and this is not a line which can be executed as a command in the Stata. So that's how you write annotations describing anything. For example, if I want to tell myself, I want to remember that this is an age variable, I can just write in front of this after in our three slashes that this is the age variable and just close it with three slashes. So then Stata will recognize that this is not a part of a command, but it is a part of an annotation that I have made for myself. So we can start a do file, we can save a do file in a particular area, and then we can just open the do file even without opening the data set and run and execute the data file, which will run all the commands in that do file and will analyze the entire data set in the background. Let's talk here about labeling variables. So a lot of times in the Excel sheet, we have a lot of variables which don't make sense on their own. For example, if we have a variable which is very long or has 2 or 3 words in an Excel sheet, the name of that variable, when it's imported into Stata, Stata will shorten the name of the variable and truncate the name of the variable without any spaces between the words. And sometimes it can become confusing. So a clean data, you would want to have the variable labeled appropriately. For example, a variable called volun in the data set, VOLUN, would keep you wondering what was the meaning of this volun afterwards. So it's good when you are analyzing data immediately after you have collected it. But say if you are looking at it a couple of years later, you would be struggling to understand what is the meaning of this volen. So if you have in your do file, you can label this volen as volunteering is a hobby. So for our data set, we have just labeled this volen as volunteering is a hobby. So whenever the results are presented, Stata would present the results related to this variable labeled as volunteering is a hobby. Another important labeling that needs to be done. So the command for labeling a variable is lab label variable var. Then you give the name of the variable in your data set, and in inverted commas, in double inverted commas, you give whatever description that you want to attach to that label of the variable. So there are two things that you need to remember. One is a variable label, and second is a value label. So variable label is attached to the name of the variable. So here, variable name is astronomy and astron, and the label attached to astron is astronomy is a hobby. And we have used the command lab label var variable astron inverted commas begin astronomy is a hobby and double inverted commas close. The second kind of labels that we attach are the value labels. Now, let's have an example that in my data set, I have asked people for their favorite colors. And then I have coded the favorite colors offered by the individuals as 1 for white, 2 for blue, 3 for orange, 4 for red, 5 for pink, 6 for green, 7 for black, and 0 if it's not available. Now, if I'm very fresh with the data, I might remember that 1 was for white and 2 was for blue. But even after a week, I will be confused and will not remember what 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 0 stood for. And so I create here a value label. So to create a value label, the command used is lab or label def define color. Color is the name of a value label that I am starting. So this does not exist in the data at this time, but this is a new name that I give it to, that I give to this value label, which is color. And now I start defining the value label. One is the value, which is to be assigned a label white. Two is a value, which is to be assigned a label blue. Three is to be assigned orange, and so on and so forth. So after I have defined this value label called color, I now need to apply this value label color to all the values of favor. Favor was my favorite color. So then I give it a command that label the values of the variable called favor as and attach the value label color to all these values. So these three commands come together. First, we label the variable, then we define a value label, and then attach the value labels to the values present in the variable. So let's see if we have done this. And now if I want to tabulate the variable favor, what comes? So I just give it a command tab favor. And instead of giving me 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, it has given me the value labels here that it's not available for 2 individuals. White is favorite for 3 people, blue for 10, 2 for orange, 1 for red, 2 individuals have green as their favorite, and 5 have black as their favorite. And the total number of observations in my data set is about 25. So you might say that it is difficult to remember these commands in Stata, and for a new person who's starting, it may be difficult for you to remember these commands. So one easy answer is to copy these commands and keep them in a do file, and then just run that do file every time and copy and paste whenever you are trying to do a new data set, and just change the names of the variables and the names of the value labels. Still, if you are not able to figure out and you want to try out new commands, then obviously there is a drop down menu. You go to data, you go to a variables manager, or you go to a data utility, in which the data utilities we have the label utilities, where we have label variables or manage value labels or assign value label to variables. And so you can use any one of these and get the command which will come in the command window, and then just copy that command and paste it into your do file. Another thing that we often do is to create scatter plots or scatter graphs. So let's try and create a scatter graph here. So by now, if you don't remember the command that is given for creating a scatter graph, an easy way I said would be to go to the graphics, choose this option of two-way graph, which has scatter, line, etc. So I click on this and it will open a dialog box where it asks me to create a plot. Now I create a plot and it asks me what kind of plot I need to create. I just stay at default, that is basic plots. And one of the basic plots highlighted is the scatter plot. Now I need to identify which is my y variable and which is my x variable. So let me choose two continuous variables in this. And the two best continuous variables that I would like to take here would be the height and the weight of the participants. So this will simply create a scatter plot between the height and weight of individuals in our data set. So let me accept this. And now if I just click submit, it will create a scatter plot between height and weight. And if you can see roughly, there is a kind of a linear correlation between height and weight of individuals, as is common sense and as you already know from baseline knowledge. So let's close this for a moment and let's see. Here we also have the command which has come as highlighted here. So the command was two-way, bracket starts, scatter, height and weight, brackets closed. Now I can just copy this command from here and paste it into my do file. So I can paste it here after I have done my histograms, and I just paste the command here. So next time when I run the do file, it will also have the two-way scatter plot being prepared for me. Now, if I wanted to make a better scatter plot, I could modify this by adding a title to this scatter plot, and I could add scatter plot of height with weight. I could choose what should be the x-axis title and what could be the y-axis title. I could choose the size of the title. I could choose how many ticks may be available. I could choose what is the axis. I could choose what is the legend, or I could even do this by sex. So I could draw unique subgraphs for different value variables of, let's say, I could do this for sex. So let's try and see the height and weight scatter plots divided by sex. And I could also have added a graph with the totals. And when I click submit, I will get a new scatter plot where we have females, the males separately, and the total here separately. So the way to do this would be to do this from the drop down menus. And once I have done it with the drop down menus with all the additional command that I had to give, I just copy this command, which will be difficult for me to remember every time. I copy this command and keep this command in my do file. So I could write this and copy, just copy this here, and I will have this scatter plot made next time when I analyze this file. So the next important thing that I would like to cover in this particular session is another problem that comes once that I have made this scatter plot. Now I want to save this scatter plot. So let's try and save this. I just right click on this graph and click on save as, and I save it to my folder wherever I would like to save it to. And I need to change the name of the graph. So Stata would automatically save everything as graph 1, graph 2, graph 3, but I could save it as scatter of height, weight by sex. So I could try and save this in a folder in this particular wherever I'm saving it. I could save it in a new folder, which I could call figures. And that helps ultimately when I'm trying to submit a manuscript or a paper. So let me create another folder called figures in this folder where I was working and save this by the name of scatter of height, weight by sex. Another thing that I need to change here is the file format. Stata will automatically try and save it as a .gph file, which can be read only by Stata. So let me change the format of this to what is more acceptable to other journals. And most of the journals will accept either a TIFF file or a JPEG file. PDF you can save it as, but many journals will not accept PDF or figure files. TIFF is a version which works well, and you could save it as a TIFF file, and you could just click save. Notice here that Stata has used a command graph export the address of the file where it is saved as TIFF and name graph. So here you can just copy this again and copy it into your do file and put it right next to the command where we have given. And after this, it's a good idea to write replace, so that when you add a replace at the end of this command, it will replace any other previous file which has the same name and it exists in the same folder. Now, why is this important? Because if you run this file many times, if it will already have one file saved in that particular folder, and when the execution of the do command, do file reaches this particular place, Stata will stop and will tell you that this already exists in the folder and you cannot save the new file, and it will not execute any of the further commands and will just stop here. But if we write replace in this command, then it will just replace the previous file which is there with a new file, and the command will continue to execute. So after we have made a figure, it's always good to save it in our figures folder by giving the command graph export and replacing any previous files. So the Stata will export the graph in its current memory and save it into our folder. So this was as much as I wanted to talk about in this particular video on how you can make your do files better. And here we have talked about, quickly to recapitulate, the basic commands that are there in a do file, how we open do files, how we save do files, how we log in do files, how we create a log. So when we have created a log, the last command should also be log close. That means here it has opened a log when we have given this command. And here at the end of the do file, it has closed the particular log at that time. Then we also talked about how to label variables, how to annotate in the do file, and we spoke about scatter diagrams as an example to export files and save our graphs. I hope this session was useful to you. Thanks for stopping by.